Does it feel sometimes like everything is going wrong and at the worst possible moment? Today, we discuss how parenting an autistic child can lower your mental and emotional threshold for dealing with hard times, what this looks like in our family, and how we continue learning healthier ways to manage the stress. Before we get started, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for reminders of upcoming streams. Let's get started. Hi, Embracers.
I was going to say good morning, but good evening.
Before we start, again, quick reminder, make sure to visit autismwish.org. Click on that wonderful wagon fundraiser link for a chance to win that wonderful wagon courtesy of Babies on Broadway while helping support our programs. $1 will get you an entry, and we will draw once we reach our fundraising goal. So please consider giving today. And for those of you who are not familiar with Murphy's Law, it basically is this quote unquote unofficial law that says like anything that can go wrong will go wrong. And there's that added caveat of, oh, and by the way, it will also happen when things are like the worst possible timing and things are already. There's like expressions about like when it's raining and then you slip and then you get hit by a car and then on the way there, like you lose your insurance so you can't pay for it. Like those weird cartoon shorts that they do on like Pixar and stuff like that when it show like everything going wrong. That's Murphy's Law.
Yes, that is a one way to sum it up. Good job.
I don't think it was a summary. I think it was like an expansion. I like oversaid it.
I don't know what it was. I mean, it works, but yeah, that was quite elaborate.
Lengthy.
So, right.
Yeah, so that's Murphy's Law. So we have been having particular struggles right now in our family life, and it got me thinking about how I personally have felt more vulnerable when I'm under a lot of stress when it comes to parenting my kid. So I think that it's probably something that's fairly common, I would assume quite relatable, that, you know, when you are under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, whether it's like bills or whether it's like difficulty getting therapies or your kids getting bullied or something going on in your life, it tends to kind of lower that threshold that we have to be able to cope with those stressors. And so that's something that we in particular have been struggling with lately, because it does feel like in our family at the moment, everything that can hit us is hitting us hard all at once.
And I think a big part of it is kind of the idea of if you're giving so much focus to one thing because you really need to work on whatever it is, whether it's getting your kids into therapy or something else, because you're so laser focused on that one thing, you're kind of almost oblivious to all the other areas that can like impact you. And I feel like it definitely leaves you open to be kind of like sidelined or T-boned, whatever.
Blindsided?
Yeah, I knew it was some type of sideline or blindside. Okay. Got it. So yeah, it kind of leaves you open because you're not even looking over yonder, and it's just kind of like easy for something to kind of like hit you, essentially, metaphorically.
Yeah, like so for our family, how this has looked like in the past week is we have had crazy things happen. So we basically found out that we have like a termite infestation going on, and we had no idea about this until we saw mushrooms growing on our wall. And we were like, what is that? And then we realized that there was like a water problem and like all this stuff just compiling together. And although, yes, that was extremely stressful because of the financial situation. So, for example, we have to deal now with the financial stressors of repairing all the damage that's done. But at the same time, we have to balance with how that impacts our ability to parent our kids. And in this particular instance, it's things like being able to take them out or bring them to their therapies or anything like that, because we're basically stuck at home dealing with the construction and everything to repair all the damage that's been done. So we can't go out and do these other things that we would normally do to keep them stabilized over the summer. So then that adds a layer of stress, because then they have more behaviors, they have more regressions. So for us, that's definitely been something that has been a challenge this last week or so.
Well, and then to add kind of to it, it wasn't just essentially that, I mean, we saw mushrooms growing out of our wall, which, I mean, it's kind of trippy.
Get Not that kind
But
of mushrooms.
right. But anyway, I mean, we were already, I mean, working our way through other contracts to get other things fixed in our house. So I mean, it wasn't like, oh, we have like a huge like bundle of like, I don't know, savings or whatever, that because we just stockpile. It's like, well, we were already invested in other avenues, and then this kind of pops up out of the blue, and we're like, okay, so now we have to kind of put a hold on some of the other things that we're kind of fixing in our house to address this because this is slightly more serious. But now we're kind of juggling, okay, how are funds going to work out to make sure that at the end of the day we still have food and are not going to get like bankrupt or foreclose on like a house or anything to
Yeah.
that nature. So it's just kind of like the unexpected. You have to essentially like expect it.
And that doesn't even touch on the fact that we switched contractors to begin with because our last contractor
Right.
totally screwed us and now we have a lien on our home. So it's
Right.
like layer after layer, every problem we try to solve, there's another problem that comes from that problem and it just snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. And for me personally, the way that I have kind of evolved to deal with this sort of thing is to try to stay calm as long as possible. And then at some point in time, when that bucket of yours is completely empty, that's when like I hit my breaking point and I just like kind of have my freak out moment where we're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? We're in a panic and all of that. But I always have to kind of go back to thinking about my kids and thinking about how things will impact them and trying to keep it together for my kids. And that's something that I have found sometimes it's a struggle, but I've also found it like motivating and inspiring, like a way to keep me going during those moments. Cause I know that I have to be that light for them. And so during these moments where everything that could go wrong is going wrong, I have learned to really try to focus on that silver lining again of the things that are important. So, yeah, my house is falling apart, but hey, at least I've got my kids. We have a healthy newborn. Like, they're healthy, they're okay, and just trying to refocus my attention and energy towards enjoying that so that I don't get so frustrated and overwhelmed with the stuff that's not working out.
And it definitely is a challenge to be able to pull on like the joys, like when other things are like kind of like beating you up, where you're like, okay, like now like money is kind of becoming a little bit more of an issue. So it's hard to kind of take your mind off of, okay, how are we going to deal with this financial situation? But at the same time, we don't want that to impact our kids. So we still need to be the playful parents. We still need to be going and doing the activities that we normally would, as to like not like disrupt like their like regular regulatory like
Routine, like the
routine of sorts.
routine. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, I kind of think to the movie like The Pursuit of Happiness, like there's like the one scene, I'm not sure if you ever saw it, Leah, but
Yeah. It's a
there's
good
like
movie.
the one scene like where he's with his son in like the metro, and like he's like playing like, oh, I think there's like dinosaurs that are going to attack, like let's run off and like hide. And it was like at the end of the day, and it's like they like ran off and hide to like sleep and spend the night in like the bathroom, and they lock the door and stay in there because the dinosaurs are outside. So it's like even in like a like terrible situation where it's like, I mean, he was like homeless, he still has to be able to provide a environment where his son doesn't necessarily see all the struggles and challenges that we have to go through as an adult. So I mean, that is kind of like my goal. I essentially through this is we try to shield our children as best we can from the, I don't know, the life
Impact.
of, well, yeah, kind of like the struggles of like adulthood until they're ready to take on those steps. So like obviously they're way too young to be pulled into the daily struggles of being an adult because they're 5 and 6, and I wouldn't expect them to. So we try to like shield them as much as possible from like some of the stress that mom and dad are dealing with at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that I mean that also applies to like if there's marital stress, if we're having any sort of like relationship problem at the time, like if we're in some sort of argument or fight or anything like that, like we try to shield our kids from that and just deal with that quietly behind closed doors so at least it doesn't impact them. But one of the things that I have noticed is that when we have had these big moments of like our house flooding or like our window falling apart or the termites coming in or those types of moments, it has been difficult to kind of maintain that aura of like peace that I normally am able to keep. And what I've noticed is that it, for me, takes a lot of effort to maintain that natural joy and that peace, even when things are going well, because when things are going well, you're still dealing with these extra struggles that parents who don't have special needs kids don't have to deal with. So even on your best day, it's sunny, it's gorgeous, you won the lottery, you're still going to come home to having a kid who might be playing with their own feces, or like having to deal with a horrible meltdown that results in like violent outbursts. Like, you're still dealing with these things on the day to day, and those alone can be really taxing emotionally. So Murphy's Law to me is just kind of like the cherry on top, like the negative cherry on top of when things are already at this level of tension. So I have kind of noticed that parenting an autistic child really leaves you kind of worn out to begin with. And so it's more difficult to fight these battles. And it's a bigger challenge to go and deal with something that might be very simple to somebody else, like, oh, I got a flat tire, that could, for us, feel like the end of the world. And then people are less empathetic because they feel like you're overreacting to a small problem when they don't see everything that's behind that. They don't see all the other stressors that you've been dealing with chronically over years.
And we've dealt with that where we got a flat tire, and that was not a great situation, mostly because our kids were in
Not
respite
with us.
care and we had to go pick them up to go to a specialized special needs swim class that is very, very difficult to set up. So, I mean, yeah, just something, I mean, well, I say as simple as like a tire being like blown out or a flat tire or anything like that. But it also adds, I mean, all the other chaos that kind of is attached to it. No, I mean, I think you're exactly right. I mean, a lot of the things we can try and plan for. So, like, we're really big into, excuse me. So, we're really big into saving money. I mean, we honestly barely ever go on any trips. A trip to us is basically like a road trip that we drive to. I mean, I can't
The
remember the
grocery
last,
store.
and I was going to say, I can't remember the last flight I was on. But basically, like we save everything we make as much as possible because we are expecting eventually you're going to have a rainy day and eventually you're going to be kind of like stuck without an umbrella. So like save up as
Or a
much as
leaky window.
right, exactly. So like save up as much as possible and you can try and like attack some of these problems as they come financially. But you're exactly right. I mean, that doesn't really touch on, I mean, so many other emotions that are tied. I mean, because not everything is a financial problem that you just throw money at. I mean, as far as just like burnout or, I mean, job stress, I mean, there's so many other things that are kind of linked to, you can't just, here's a check for money and problems go away. So,
Yeah. I know for me, one of the things that I tend to do that has been kind of part of my personality since I've been young, essentially, is kind of catastrophizing. So what that means is essentially when you confront a problem or you're faced with a problem, you instinctively dive to like worst case scenario. And that is something that I personally have struggled with as long as I can remember. And so for me, one of the things that I deal with when we're under these levels of stress is really forcing myself to consciously make an effort to not catastrophize. So trying to talk myself through it and be like, okay, we don't really know what the situation is yet. Try hard not to freak out and think it's the worst case scenario. And what I've noticed is that if I'm not dealing with these additional stressors, so like if my kids have not had meltdowns lately, if they're not regressing, if they're not having all these other issues, it's a lot easier for me to avoid catastrophizing. It's a lot easier for me to healthily cope with whatever stress I am dealing with. But if my kid is struggling quite a bit that week, then my threshold for that is a lot lower and I can't fight that natural instinct and I will fall into that trap. And I think that that is something that we've struggled with this past week as well because summer has just hit. And because summer has hit, our kids are noticeably regressing. They don't really qualify for like ESI, was it ESY,
yes.
extended school year.
Oh.
They don't really qualify for that, so they don't get it. But I do feel now, after seeing how they've been behaving, that they probably would benefit from something like that because not having the regular routine from school, not being able to see their friends like they used to, it's really throwing them off, and we're seeing a huge spike in behaviors. I mean, I've even seen them suddenly grabbing their chewies and needing their chewies, which they haven't needed in a while.
Almost a
They're
year
very, yeah, they're very
plus.
sensitive. Yeah. And so that is kind of one of the things that was lowering that threshold for me emotionally. So dealing with the stress of the regressions and the unknown, because does this regression mean that some old things are going to come out again? I mean, our youngest started playing with like fecal matter again. She hasn't done that in like ever. And like now suddenly that's coming out. So it does kind of give you this underlying level of constant stress, which makes anything else that goes wrong that much harder to deal with.
Right. And I think, I mean, for me, as far as dealing with like the stress, I kind of think of it like, I guess, like a standard deviation. So, like with this, I mean, like,
Don't do math. I can't do
no, no,
math.
but like in not in a math friendly way because I'm terrible with numbers. But if you think about like, okay, you're stuck in a situation, it is highly unlikely that it will be absolute worst situation imaginable. Just the pure likelihood of that. So I would say, okay, give it a 1% chance that it's going to be that. At the same time, it's also probably not going to be best case scenario. So 1% there. And so naturally, you'd kind of find the problem somewhere in the middle. It might be kind of shifted to slightly worse or slightly better than you anticipate from the middle. But basically, you have like a standard bell curve, in my opinion, of where your situation would fall. So
Are you sure you're not autistic? That
I
was a
might
very
be,
autistic
but
answer.
but like if you think about like the likelihood of just like life events in like a purely like logical and like analysis, like so like worst case scenario for our house is like, oh, the termites got everywhere and we're just gonna have to like
Demolished
blow it
completely.
up. Right, that's like worst case. So it's highly unlikely that that would be the case. Best case scenario would be like, oh, they moved a nail out of the way, just
But
replace the
see,
nail. But like,
that's what I'm talking about when it comes to lowering the threshold. What happens for me personally is the threshold of what is considered a disaster gets lowered because my ability to cope with that stress is now lessened. And so for me, if I didn't have to deal with the increase in the regressions that the kids are having, or maybe like, for example, we didn't get her successfully put into that program in school at the end of the year. So now we have to try all over with a new school. These little things kind of add up and lower that threshold so that maybe the nail sticking out of the wall now feels like a much bigger problem than it would have prior to that. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, where if you're raising autistic kids, things that other people think are minimal or not that stressful to you might actually be a big deal because you just don't have the emotional capacity to handle it.
sure. I mean, it depends on how you're, yeah, on how you're assessing each individual item in, I guess, the scheme of things. I was more so thinking about like the major situations like Murphy's Law that kind of pop out of like nowhere, where you're kind of like reflecting on like, okay, how significant is this? And you're like, okay, it's not great, but like, hopefully it's not like worst case scenario.
No.
Yeah, okay.
Like if you're, well, what I mean by no is like when you're really stressed and overwhelmed, you're not thinking that. Like you're not processing things. You're just kind of like overwhelmed and you're just like, at least, I don't know, maybe this is like a gender difference. Maybe
Maybe.
this could be like women process things more emotionally and like we're kind of just thinking that route, and like you're as a man thinking things really like logically and like trying to come up solution based. Because I have heard, I mean, I'm not a guy, I wouldn't know, but I have heard that guys tend to problem solve things more like solution based, like this is the problem, how can I get to the solution, whereas girls tend to not process things like that. We tend to process things more like emotionally. Like I don't really know how to explain it, but it's definitely not super solution based. Of
Hmm.
course, there's a caveat that that's not for everyone. Like some girls do that way, some guys do it the other way. It's all over the place, but just kind of like the general trend and the one
Weird.
that I would fall into.
Yeah, seems like you'd want to solve the problem versus getting emotional about the problem. But
What?
who am I
You're
to?
you're about to get in
Who am
trouble
I?
here.
But I will digress. Who am I to judge the best approach to solution solving?
So basically, what we're trying to deal with now is trying to come up with better solutions so that next time something like this happens, we can cope with it a little bit better. I know for me, I am trying to give myself a 24-hour grace period. And this is something that I tell people. all the time. I'm like, look, it's okay for you to feel your feelings, and it's okay for you to get stressed or overwhelmed if you need to in order to like get that out of your system. I feel like one of the traps that people fall into is that people tell you like, "Oh, don't worry, don't freak out, don't get overwhelmed, don't do this or that." And to me, that just stresses me out more because it doesn't make the feelings go away, but you're forced to kind of like keep them all inside. And when you keep them all inside, it just increases that adrenaline rush and you're just frustrated and stressed and have no outlet.
Uh,
So I always recommend that like people, well, the people saying that, please don't say that and give them an outlet to express those feelings. For example, listen to them. Like if it's your spouse, listen to them during that time. If it's your parent, whoever, best friend, just give them a moment to vent. But if you are the person who is struggling, give yourself the grace to be able to feel those emotions and feel the stress and feel overwhelmed and complain and rant about it and just be able to get all of that out of your system and then get back to like, okay, now I need to come up with a way or strategy to deal with this, process this, whatever it may be. But don't deny yourself the ability to feel your feelings because I feel like for me, that just makes things worse.
I think I probably said about all those phrases to you. Like,
Yeah, you're really
don't,
bad about this.
don't worry about it. We got this. You'll be great. You're strong. You got it. You're good.
But hey, we're still married, right? So we're still doing something, right?
Yeah, you just get real quiet and you just kind of like,
We're
I
like,
don't know,
I'm
just
making you
growl.
dinner tomorrow for sure. For sure. I'm going to be in
So-
charge of dinner tomorrow.
So, anywho, but yeah, no, I mean, it's hard though because you never know like what the situation will be. That will be like the straw that's on the camel's back that breaks it,
No, the
essentially.
straw that breaks the camel's back.
I almost
not the
had it.
straw. It's not the straw on the camel's back.
Well, you put the straw on the back and then it breaks the camel's back.
Yeah.
The last straw. Anyway, but you don't really know necessarily what it is. So while we like to think it could be financial because it's easy to deal with a financial situation because that's basically just, I mean, not that like making a ton of money is easy, but like saving up money, like that is a easy solution versus like something that is not able to be solved financially. That's, I feel like a little bit harder of
Yeah.
a challenge because
I think the thing that we've been kind of learning about each other with our relationship and managing stress is that we cope with things differently, which again, I attribute to our gender differences because again, men tend to be the fixers, but women want to like talk and process our feelings out. And so it has taken some time for us to be able to connect those. So if we are going under this like stressful moment, I want to be able to talk to you and kind of get it all out of my system. And I feel like you tend to think that I actually want a fix to the problem, but it's more like, no, it's a tea kettle. The steam needs to get out or it's just going to explode. So you have to have that little valve that lets the steam come out. And then as the steam goes out, it auto adjusts. It doesn't explode. So I feel like that's kind of like my system. It's like I need to be able to blow some steam.
and that helps you solve the problem.
Yes, because the
Okay.
problem is a different problem for us than it is for you. That's my point. Women and men tend to cope with things differently. And for those of you listening out there, because I know the majority of our listeners are women, please do comment. Go to our YouTube at Autism Wish, go to Facebook at Autism Wish, or on the private community, because I want you to please show Matt how women process this stuff. And if you happen to be one of those women that doesn't process it, maybe you're doing it the way Matt does, let us know too. But I definitely feel like Matt doesn't understand why women do what we do. And I totally get it. This is like every man doesn't get their wife. It's just like a thing that happens.
Yep, that's why I journal about my feelings.
What? No, you don't.
I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like, if you say like, "Oh, I need you," like, okay, problem, you have to take out the trash. I don't journal like how I feel about taking out the trash, and then that helps me solve.
Yeah, I don't do that either. That's a weird thing to do.
I don't know. I
think
can't- I
anyone
can't-
does that.
But I can't think of like a time like where I can use like my emotion to help me to solve another problem. I don't know. I feel like that's like a 4D chess thing that I don't get.
Yeah, I think women are just
So-
better at chess.
So I'm-
So what I'm basically just trying to work on is finding better solutions, not just for us, but like for our kids. Because the most important thing is for us to kind of self regulate so that our kids don't deregulate. And when our kids are the reason that we are feeling that overwhelm or stress, maybe they are going through a meltdown mode, maybe they're having some sort of emotional dysregulation at the time. The last thing we need to do is kind of like add fuel to that fire. So, stress management is really important. And whatever that stress management looks like for you, go for it. For me, it tends to be right now watching TV because that's all I can do as a parent to like a newborn and like the two autistic kids, like a full-time job. Like I don't have time to have hobbies anymore. So for me, it's just like, can I stay up an hour at night and just watch something on YouTube, on Netflix, and then that's my moment to decompress. So just make sure you have those moments.
And I think the other one that you kind of, I mean, mentioned indirectly is kind of the idea of like communication. So, like, I mean, even though, okay, Murphy's Law is going to pop up and you're not going to expect it, it is helpful just to have someone to talk to. So, I mean, it's kind of like if you're wandering through the woods alone and it's dark, you might be, okay, like this is a little eerie. I'm not really sure, like, what is in the darkness. But if you have a friend that's walking with you, suddenly, even if the friend has no expertise about forest knowledge or anything, you slightly feel a little bit better because you have someone with you. So you're not in this game alone. So it doesn't, I mean, I guess it could be a spouse, friend, family member, anyone. If you're able to pull someone in from your network of friends or whoever, I feel like then you're not walking the journey alone. So you have some type of connection. And I feel like just having someone there provides a safety net that, I mean, will ultimately kind of help you in the long run so you don't feel that you have to solve every problem by yourself.
Yeah, because the goal is to increase that threshold. So if you have a decreased threshold because you're parenting a special needs kid, you have to find ways to increase that, whether that is like self-care through making sure that you do get a chance to watch a movie or whatever it is that works for you, or maybe you decrease the stressors. So whatever those stressors are, if there's any of them that are within your control, eliminate those. Like for example, sometimes we put stress upon ourselves that's not necessary. Like maybe we're taking on too many responsibilities by volunteering for PTO and volunteering at Sunday school and also saying yes to helping babysit our neighbor's dog. Sometimes it's self-inflicted in that we take on more than we probably should. So it's giving yourself the ability to draw a line and also say no sometimes, just to make sure that you are able to, put your own mask on first. I think that as parents, we tend to get very much in that parent role where we're all about taking care, taking care, taking care, and we forget to take care of ourselves. And that's where Murphy's Law comes in, and then we have no defense system because we've depleted our resources. So making sure that we refill those resources is pivotal to being able to fend off these circumstances, essentially.
Well said. Refill.
That's yes. So that's all that we have for today. Do you guys currently find yourself battling stress on multiple fronts? Do you feel that it impacts your ability to parent effectively? Or do you often feel on edge or like you're on the verge of breaking because of life circumstances? Maybe you're really good at coping. Have you discovered a really good rhythm that helps you cope well through these tough times? If you have, please share because we would love to know. You can share on our YouTube or Facebook at Autism Wish. Share your best tips, share your best stories, whatever it may be. We will read every single one of those comments. Or you can also continue the conversation with us on our private Embracing Autism community. Don't forget to become a member today at autismwish.org for access to that community where you can help us with our mission while also finding your tribe and connecting with us. Thanks for hanging out, you guys, and we will see y'all next time.
Bye.
Bye.